Milo felt a gnawing discomfort in his gut as they headed to the motel. He remembered handing someone money for the room when he was there. He tried to recall their expression, but it was gone. Even so, no one he knew. He should have known better. He should have sensed Richard or any of the other people who were working there at the time. It demonstrated how genuinely dismal things had gotten. Grendel started chattering constantly as he and Milo walked, informing him of what happened while he was away. It was largely about Molly, Richard, and the newest addition to the family, Olive. He mentioned Isabel on occasion. Milo tried not to let it show how much he had truly missed her, trying to seem less interested in her affairs. But the truth was all of this gave him relief for several reasons. It was good to know that his loved ones were doing well. But that was just half of it. Grendel's rants had become a source of solace for him. A technique in tuning out the world around him. His thoughts in his head kept roaming. In particular, he considered the aging process. The gradual loss of mental faculties some people could experience. Something he had not considered since he had never anticipated it happening to him. Still, the more time passed, the more likely this prospect appeared to be. He kept an eye on Grendel to see if he showed any symptoms of what he was going through. Milo's pain-sensitive brain regions had been disabled for some time. Grendel would never do anything like this, as it dulled other sensations one could experience. If Grendel had been going through the same thing, it was sure to be much worse. Silence had become too much of a burden. Grendel's babblings had not occupied him long enough for him to forget about his worries. Furthermore, they had moved onto a busy thoroughfare. He did not want to express how unnerved he was by the passing vehicles. "How long have you been awake?" He didn't need to know this. However, he was aware that he would need to be there for the conversation in order to forget about his troubles. "I'm not sure, maybe 2 or 3 years." Everything had merged into a haze. Grendel stated with a broad gesture that he did not want to discuss it with Milo. "You've acclimated nicely to the new circumstances." Milo was overwhelmed with embarrassment. The vehicles, buildings, and people all generated a lot of noise. Of course, none of this was new. Humans have long been known for their prodigious output. They had previously only lived in densely crowded areas. Overcrowding made it easier to obtain food while avoiding discovery. But this was simply too much. They'd have to trundle him out to the country to spend his final years in peace. He shuddered involuntarily at the prospect. It was the first time he had questioned their dynamic. He had always assumed Grendel needed his help since he was a child. However, it looked like he did well on his own. At the very least, he outperformed Milo's expectations. Better than Milo had done with Justin in the previous months. He had almost stopped thinking about the traffic when an automobile honked at another driver. Milo leapt as Grendel gave him a feeble grin, remarking, "They're not that awful on the inside," referring to the vehicles on the road. Obviously, driving is a whole other ballgame. After I plowed through a stop sign, Kit Kat wouldn't let me drive her car anymore. It wasn't my fault, though. Then, Grendel took up his pace, putting him ahead of Milo by a short distance. Taking a few steps in reverse to face him while he talked. When asked, "How often have you gone by it?" "The hotel, to be precise." Until they were within sight of it, Milo did not speak. There was just one time he had visited the area. But it was one time too many. Technically, Milo paused. Although it was only once, the words lingered in his throat. Milo had avoided the area since that day because the street it was on was always too congested. He was, however, present. He was in the building. How could he have been so absent-minded? Even telling Grendel this was difficult. He was finally able to respond. "It was the place I turned," Justin admitted, his face contemptuous. Grendel burst out laughing as he approached the hotel's entrance. "Well shit, that's embarrassing," he said as he held the door open for Milo. They had only just entered the massive room when a familiar voice began shouting at them. They turned around in time to see Richard sprint across the lobby to join them. He yelled to get their attention by saying, "You. What have you been doing?" Grendel must have made a huge mistake this time if he was reacting so strongly. Perhaps he wasn't doing as well as he thought he was. "What exactly do you mean?" Grendel's reaction was ferocious. "You are aware of my whereabouts. You are the one." Richard's pupils dilated as he wildly waved his arms. "No, you idiot, not you." As he approached the two of them, he cast a quick glance in all directions. "Don't say anything, just shut up." As he spun around, he pointed an accusatory finger at Milo. You. His expression on Milo was unusual. I've been looking for you for months. What the heck have you been up to? Grendel burst out laughing. He had no idea this was our hotel. Milo felt compassion for everyone in their history who seemed to despise Grendel for no apparent reason. Richard, still looking around, eventually focused on Grendel. Don't be so dense, he was obviously aware. He looked to Milo for an answer, one Milo was unable to provide. Richard's expression shifted from angry to perplexed. How could you not know? His perplexity grew as he got closer to Milo. You gave the cashier $100 in cash but no identification or payment method. His voice was now down to a whisper. Milo thought it was all Greek, but he soon came to despise whatever the world had become. I'm not sure why I would need all of that just to secure rooms. How much do the room rates typically cost? Richard responded with a blank stare. The room you were in. The one I specifically saved for you would have cost $1,000 per night for anyone else. You gave the teller a $100 bill. He mistook it for a tip. For Pete's sake, simply taking one of the robes costs more than that. Milo was taken aback by the news but was unable to respond. His stomach suddenly became extremely painful, causing him to stoop for a fraction of a second. Ricard did another quick 360-degree spin around the room before charging through them. He led them all by the arms to one of the various elevators in the building. Once inside the elevator, Milo realized the reason for their delay at the double doors. He had seen similar, but less appealing, sights before. All traces of the pulleys and wires were tucked away. However, the purpose was elementary in nature. Something rang in the small room, and Milo immediately recognized it as the cell phone. Richard pulled it out, looked at it briefly, and then placed it back. A second later, a new sound went off. Richard took a second phone from his pocket. This time, though, he touched the screen swiftly before tucking the device away. Why do you have two phones? Asked Grendel. Work phone and a personal phone, Richard answered, not looking at either of them. Standing with his hands behind his back, facing the elevator doors. No, Grendel said while giving him a wary look. I know what your work phone looks like. It wasn't like that. With a grim look on his face, Richard confronted Grendel. Do you want to question me now, after everything I've been through? After all your mess I had to clean up? That I'm still cleaning up? He then looked up to the corner where a gigantic black bubble stood as if that was an answer. Grendel muttered under his breath and stuffed his hands into his pockets. Yes, indeed. Oh, I see. Although Milo did not understand, it was obvious that this was not a safe space for a candid conversation. Along each side of the corridor, doors were sparsely spaced. They went to the second one, past the elevators, as directed by Richard. As soon as they walked in, the tension in the room was cut in half. Milo looked around the room. As soon as you walked in the door, there was a tiny kitchen off to the side. There was everything he could want or need to feel at ease. Following that, you'd enter a comfortable living room. A fresh white sofa on a grey carpet. In front of him was a large screen, which Milo discovered was a television from his stay with Justin. It was something he had yet to master. Grendel, on the other hand, sat down on the couch, turned it on, and appeared to understand it, causing a visual transition between each flick of the remote. Thank you for putting up with all the nonsense while you were attempting to keep me safe, Richard. From behind, Richard approached him, putting on a show of irritation. Oh, Milo, it was my pleasure to deal with the chaos you created. Stunningly throwing Milo off yet again. What exactly did he do to deserve such trouble? What did I do? Milo inquired. You know it's really hard to maintain a shadow government when someone is blabbing about all of our secrets, Richard said, folding his arms. His shoulders loosened a little. Nonetheless, it was clear that he was still thinking in economic terms. Richard became increasingly agitated as it became clear that Milo had no idea what he was talking about. The girl, he added as if that was all Milo needed to know. The dark-skinned girl with green hair who threatened my family. He had to be referring to Amy, but when? How? I have not been blabbing to anyone, I can assure you. Hearing himself use the term, blabbing, was unsettling. It was something he despised completely. I haven't told Justin much because in fear he'll tell Amy. She couldn't possibly get anything from me. Is that what you think? Richard added with a stern expression. Milo was taken aback by Amy's method of gathering enough evidence to threaten Richard. Even more remarkable was the fact that she was still alive. For as kind and loving Richard was to his family, he was just as cutthroat when it came to affairs outside of that life. Had he gotten soft in the years Milo was asleep? Then Richard started telling them how, in recent years, tiny groups of humans had begun to assemble and murder what they called vampires. The Netopuri, also known as the cold-blooded vampires, constituted the bulk of this group's hit list. CROW, in particular, had caused enough trouble for the Netopuri that they sought assistance from the Kaw-Sekhmu. That was why they now had a foothold in the United States. Despite keeping everyone on high alert, Richard continued. Nobody knows what the group looks like. Is that why you didn't murder her? As Milo put it, he gradually realized what was going on. Richard concurred, saying, precisely. If only I could get my hands on one of them. Everything else would be a breeze. Milo never questioned it. Richard was more than capable of handling the situation. A select few possessed the ability to silence others by declaring that certain topics are off-limits for further discussion. Even fewer people were capable of completely erasing memories. Richard possessed both, which was a sufficient justification for his rapid ascension through the Kaw-Sekhmu ranks. The bulk on the couch that was Grendel let forth a moan. Exasperated, he sighed and muttered, fine. I'll do it. Milo and Richard looked at him like he was from another planet. I don't understand what you're talking about. Richard inquired, approaching the spot where Grendel was lying. Would you like to know where this crow group is? As he waited for the others to respond, he let out a sigh. Amy appears to have had prior contact with them. He managed to raise himself high enough to rest his head on the armrest. I'm confident she'll open up to me. And why would she tell you anything? Richard inquired. He shifted his gaze to Milo. You noticed how she was. She would have tried to jump my bones if we were alone. Hell, she'd probably tried even if you were in the room. Don't worry. I'll make sure you have all of the information you need. He rolled over and returned his gaze to the television. Milo would have assumed it was just boasting on the part of anybody else. But his familiarity with Grendel told him that wasn't the case. When he put his mind to it, he could be pretty charming. That's one upside to having a succubus on hand, I guess. Richard laughed contemptuously, showing his true feelings. He averted his gaze from Grendel as if doing so would dispel the repulsive mental image that had captured his thoughts. Succubus. Grendel had an internal monologue. The beginnings of a cocky grin appeared. This was instantly obvious to Milo. He saw the casual remark as a high compliment. Sexy. All right. Just don't do anything stupid again, Richard warned. Another sharp pain sprang through Milo as Ricard turned to leave, startling all of them. At the entrance, he turned, wide-eyed and nervous, and spoke compassionately. By the end of the day, a doctor will be on their way to see you, on me. Eventually, Milo shuffled up to the couch, where Grendel kindly raised his legs so he could sit down. While Richard left the motel room, Grendel looked at him thoughtfully.